Welcome everyone to Training Without Travel, IDEA Software Training via Practical Application, presented jointly by AuditNet and Richard Cascarino and Associates. This webinar is part of the Training Without Travel series covering IDEA software, and today's webinar covers importing data, the complete course in all file types and data tricks to get your data ready for analysis. My name is Jim Kaplan. I'm founder and owner of AuditNet. I'll be moderating today's webinar. Joining us is Richard Cascarino, principal of Richard Cascarino and Associates. Let me have Richard introduce himself, give you a brief overview of his background, and then I'll cover some of the housekeeping items for today's webinar. Richard?
Thanks, Jim. Welcome to the webinar. As Jim said, as punishment for your sins, you've got me for the webinar. For those of you who weren't with us on the Tuesday webinar, let me introduce myself. I'm the principal of Richard Cascarino and Associates, based out of Steamboat Springs in Colorado, and also out of Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm currently broadcasting to you from South Africa. My background, I've got a depressing number of years experience in IT audit training and consultancy in all of those areas. I'm a past president of the Institute of Internal Auditors in South Africa, and I'm a member of ISACA, the ACFE and the IIA. Although I'm broadcasting from South Africa, I'm actually a member of the Denver chapter of the IIA. I'm the author of 2 or 3 books on internal auditing, IT auditing and forensic auditing, as you can see. That's my background, that's where I'm coming from. I'll pass you back to Jim so that he can take you through some of the housekeeping.
Thanks, Richard. I sent out the slides this morning, so I'm not going to read from the slides, but basically we are recording today's webinar, and you will receive a link to the recording within the next day or so. It depends on how long it takes us to download and then work with the software and then get it back uploaded. So we will be getting that link to you hopefully within the next day. That'll come with the follow-up email. This is a NASBA supported webinar, so we have NASBA rules that we have to follow. There will be polling questions. If you're joining us from a tablet device, you may not be able to answer the polling questions, in which case if you just accumulate all of your answers and send them to us by email, we will record them so you'll get your CPE. You do have to answer all the questions. You don't have to answer them correctly, but you do have to answer the questions. We will be sending out the CPE certificates. Those will come within the next couple of days. We'd like to do those. We'll probably do both of them for this week, get those out to you tomorrow. You can submit questions. There's a chat box on the GoToWebinar, so just fill in the questions. I'll be monitoring those questions, passing them along to Richard, and hopefully we'll be able to answer those during the webinar. If GoToWebinar does stop working, you may need to close and restart it. The next screen provides some disclaimers. I'm not going to read the disclaimers. I'm going to let Richard get right into today's material so he has the maximum amount of time available. Thanks. Richard?
Okay, thanks, Jim. Okay, what are we going to cover today? We're going to look at the different types of data file that we can handle within IDEA, different types of files coming in, the different structures, importing them from different varieties. There's some advantages in doing it one way rather than the other. Let me switch off my little mouse and go into the one I normally use. There's some advantages bringing them in from, for example, an ODBC compliant database rather than bringing them in from a text file if you can get the data in that format. So we'll look at the different file types. We'll look at the record lengths, we'll look at field delimiters, we'll look at field details, creating fields, using import criteria, and appending a virtual field into what you've already imported. As before, we'll start off with starting IDEA either on the version 8, where you would start programs, IDEA, and set the working folder to contain the data files, any equations, views, or import definitions. I've been asked, why do it on a working folder? Why are we using a copy of the data? Okay. The trick for an auditor is, if anybody challenges any of your results, you have to be able to recreate those results in order to prove that what you originally asserted is true. If you are interrogating live data, and you can do that, you can use various utilities to extract information from the database on a live basis. But the problem is that the database moves on. And that means that you cannot actually reproduce what you've just done. So we typically take the data and bring a copy down and work on a copy of the data. And we retain that copy so that 6 months from now, if someone says, but how did you come to that conclusion? We can bring it back up, redo it. If somebody challenges it, or in the case of, for example, if this is going to come to court, let's say it's a fraud case or a case where you have to lead evidence in a breach of contract lawsuit, then you may have to be able to produce in court the evidence that you originally worked on in order to repeat the exercises, or give it to a third party so that they can repeat the exercise to try and come to the same answer. We do that by using our files, our raw data files, and we set the working folder to whatever we choose so that we know that that one contains all of the data, all of the definitions, all of the views of data for this particular audit. Okay. If it's version 9 that you're using, that would be very similar. You start the programs, IDEA, and you set it up. But this time you set it up by using projects. And we can manage the projects, and we can draw it as we so desire. So let me go into my IDEA. And we can all then be on the same wavelength, hopefully. Now, if I was starting from scratch, I would be closing my active database or opening a given database, whichever we choose. In this case, I'm going to go in the selecting the existing project, and the project I'm selecting is samples, which happens to be the one that we used on Tuesday. Okay. If I wanted to start a brand new project, I would create a new project. It could be an external project that I'm bringing in, or a managed project. I'm going to create a managed project this time, and we're going to call it IDEA course. And we'll start the whole thing off from scratch. And you can see that at the bottom it tells me I'm in a managed project called IDEA course, and it shows no files because I have no files in there. So the first thing I need to do, obviously, is bring in some files, and the way I'm going to do that is through my Desktop Plus. So I'm going to create this from square one. And what I want to do is import the same file that we used on Tuesday for those who were with us then, and we're going to bring in our sales text file. Now our sales text file is, as it says, a text file. These are the different files that we'll take a look at today, and we'll find that sitting, the source file that I'm going to bring it in from is sitting under tutorial, and it's going to be called sales.txt, and it should be in the same place on yours. So there's my IDEA document. Sales.txt is a text file, and I'll say yes. Okay. It's looked at it, it's analyzed it, it says, well, this is a fixed length file, it looks like an ASCII file, I'm quite happy with that. It could be comma delimited, it may not be. If I'm bringing it in from a file that's been output from Excel, oh, it's asking me if I want to change my color scheme. Thank you very much, I'll do that. This is Windows version 7. It does that kind of thing occasionally. I'm bringing it in from a fixed length file. There's the data, the raw data that I'm bringing in. Okay. It says, I think this is a 42 character long file. That's fine. I'm happy with that. The reason I'm happy with that is because I have the file layout in front of me. Now, occasionally you will get the situation where you're given a data file and they've no idea what the file layout is. That makes life very difficult for you as an auditor. But if you look at the raw data as you see it in front of you, you may still be able to find stuff that you can use. Looking at that, I can see Amex. Okay, well, I know that that's a payment type, so there's a payment type in there somewhere. 2006-07-21, that's a date, so I know that that's a date. I know that this particular company that I'm working with has a type of salesman, and I know they use a 3-digit salesman code, so it could be any of these numbers or any of those numbers. I wonder what one they are. Well, we're looking at sales data here, and we know that we've got invoices. Well, let me look at some of the actual invoices. Look, there's an invoice, and that's the invoice number. Fine, so I know the layout there, I know the layout there, the date, I know the payment type is going to be in there. So the salesman must be in here somewhere. What else do I have? I've got customer numbers. Well, there's this invoice that I'm looking at gives me a customer number that's a 21254 customer number. Well, there's a 21254, so that must be the customer number field. Now I know it's a 3-digit salesman, and that's only 2 digits, so that must be the salesman, the 101. Okay, we're getting somewhere. And what's that 05? Well, I'm not quite sure. Hang on, let me look at that invoice again. Oh yeah, it says that this is product code 05 that they bought. So that must be the product code. And there's the value of the invoice. So you can do it without the file layout. But sometimes you're on a wing and a prayer if you don't have it. I did some work for the taxman in South Africa where they were trying to do a reconciliation of creditors. And they had the files, but they had no file layouts. And we actually had to sit down with printouts of tax records and try and figure out which field went where. Okay, so it's not impossible, but there will come a point where you can say, well, I know what that bit is, and I know what that bit is, and I know what that bit is, but I don't know the bits in between. Okay, so let's work with the file layout that we've got. I'll say next. Now I need to show IDEA exactly what the file looks like. And as you can see there, it tells you to create a field line, click the mouse, to remove it, double click it. Now I know that I have a 7-digit invoice number, so I don't need that line there. So if I double click, I will remove it. If you were slightly off and you double click, you're going to create one and remove it. But if you're in the right place, the line goes darker and we can remove the line. So there's my 7-digit number. The next one I want is my 6-digit date. But there's a line in the middle of that, so I need to remove that one as well. Again, if I'm in the wrong place and I double click it, I've removed the wrong line. Single click it will put it back, and I can highlight the line by making it bolder and double click. So there's my date. I'm happy with that. There's my payment type, my 4-digit payment type. Now I know that I calculated that my salesman was 123, so fine, if I click there, there's my salesman. They're going to fit into that category. I know that I've got my customer number. My customer number is 5 digits, so it finishes off to that 254. There's another line. Next 2 digits are my product code. So that looks as though it's okay. If I make a mistake when I define it, I don't have to start again. I can always go back in and change it. But in the meantime, we know that that's probably okay, so we'll say next. Okay. Now it's asking for the field names. You'll see that the layout's got certain field names on it. You don't have to use those field names. You can set them up to look like anything you want. I'm going to stick with the ones I've got. I've got my invoice number. Okay. I can put a description in there and call it invoice number. I can do anything I want. Looking at the file layout, I know that that's numeric. So that it's numeric and there are no decimal places. Down below, you'll see that what it's trying to do is show you what that field would look like. Now it says it's numeric, so there's probably going to be commas separating the thousands. We don't want that, but that's fine. If I look at the second one, it says this looks like a character field. Now it's not a character field and it's not a numeric field. It's actually a date field. So this is going to be my transaction date. And again, I can give it any description I want. I can call that invoice date or whatever I choose. It's not a character field. I need to change that. And my choices, there can be character, there can be numeric, there can be date. If it's coming in from ACPAC accounting, ACPAC uses a character structure of its own. So there's a ACPAC number, an ACPAC date, an ACPAC integer. Could be a Benford date. Could be coming in from Unisys machine in Burroughs packed format. Could be coming in from DEC using their formats. It could be coming in as an Intel integer from Pegasus. There's all kinds of different ways it could be coming in. In this case, we know that it's coming in as a date, a straightforward ASCII date. Okay, now you see it says it's a date. It also says it's unable to convert the data. The reason it can't convert it is we haven't told it what it looks like. Now I've got the mask, I know what it is, but if you simply move the cursor over there, it will tell you what is supposed to go in there. Enter the format of the date or time as in the input file. Now thinking they should have given it to me as month, month, day, day, 4 years doesn't help. They did not give it to you as that. You can change the way it will print, but in definition you have to define the data as it is. Okay, so the date we know just looking at the screen is 4 years, 2 months, 2 days. And you can see on there, there's my converted example. If I did that differently, if I took that out and said by mistake, this is month, month, year, year, 4 days. So month, month, let me try that again, day, day, 4 years. It's going to tell me I can't convert the data because that's not what that looks like. I'm going to end up with a month 20. There is no such thing as a month 20. So it will try to tell me if that's wrong. If, on the other hand, we had the 4 years and we put in, instead of month, month, day, day, we put in day, day, month, month, again it's going to say, I can't convert this because I'm going to end up with a month 21. That will not convert. It tries to help you. Usually it gets it right. Sometimes it doesn't. The next field we want is the one in the middle, which is our payment type. And I could change the description, or I could simply leave it. It thinks it's a character field. It is a character field, so I'll leave that. I'll move on to the next one. The next one is my salesman. Again, I'll leave it, or I could make it in smaller case as a description. Whoops, sladesman. Salesman. It says it's numeric. Now it might be numeric, it might not, and this is the danger if you don't have the layout. Because if I change that to character, it will accept it. But when you try to use it as a character field, it will come up and give you strange results. Calling a numeric field character is not usually so bad, but calling a character field numeric can cause real problems. So it helps if you know how it has been given to you. In this case it was numeric. No decimal places, no implied. I can move on to the next one. The next one we knew was our customer number. And again, I can call it It says it's numeric. It is numeric, so again we can leave that. The next two digits is our product code. It's up to yourself if you want a more detailed description. It says it's numeric. Now we've got a problem because it's not numeric. It's alpha. It's a character field. If you look at the converted example, that's what you get if you define it as numeric. If you define it as character, that's what you're going to get, 05. If you define it by mistake as date, it's going to say, I don't know what the hell this thing is. So we'll put it back to our character because that's what we were given and that's how we want to use it. Our final field is our amount. It is numeric. It thinks the number of decimal places is 2. Is correct. There's the first value, 431.28. If I change that to 3 decimal places, you'll notice that there's a decimal place in there, not an implied decimal, an actual decimal place in there. So if I change it to 3, all it's going to do is put an extra 0 on the end. It's going to leave the 431 as 431. If I change that to implied decimal place, it's going to give me 431, implied decimal place, and nothing behind it. So I'll take it back, and I'll take out, put it back to 2. When I'm happy with all of that lot, I can now add one or more field. Okay, if I decide to add a field, and I'm going to put in, for example, value added tax or sales tax or whatever. This is going to be a virtual field because it doesn't physically exist on the file. Is it going to be a virtual character, virtual date? It's going to be a virtual numeric field. I'm going to give it 2 decimal places, and I'm going to give it a parameter. Now, what is my value added tax? Well, tax is running at, for argument's sake, 13%. So the tax will be the amount times 13%. So what is 13%? Times 13 divided by 100. So there's my value added tax, and I'm going to call it value added, tax. Or it could be sales tax at 10% or whatever. If I stay next, I could limit that. I don't want to limit it. So I'll say OK. Specify descriptive name for the database. This is a brand new field or a brand new record definition in here. So I'm going to save the record definition as sales RDF within my IDEA course import definitions. So I'm happy with that. Do I want to generate field statistics? I can do it at this stage, or I can do it later on. I'll do it later on. Do I want to create a record number field? Am I going to manipulate information based on the record number? In this case I'm not, so I'll say finish. And it's now created it with the invoice number, the transaction date, payment type, salesman, etc. Okay. And you'll see on the right hand side there's my value added tax. And you'll also see it's in blue. When you create virtual fields, the virtual fields show in blue. So I can know just by looking at this, this field does not actually exist on the database. Okay? But I can see that the actual data is, for example, that 431.28. If I move over the VAT, I can see that that 56.07 came from amount times 13 over 100. Okay. Are we happy? Problem. I did that for 13%. It's not actually 13%, it's 14%. Damn. Well, I can go into my data and I can modify it. What do I want to modify? Well, I don't want to modify the invoice number, but I can go down to that VAT. It's a virtual numeric field, and I can go down here. I can do it through the equation editor, or I can simply go to the 13, change it to 14. It's val added. I don't want val, I want value added in my description. I will make it through it. It will change it. Do I want to continue with the changes I've just made? Yes. And it's changed all of these now to being amount times 14%. Okay. So if they haven't given you all of the data that you want, you may be able to create that data. For example, they may give you the sales price and the unit cost, but what they haven't done is given you the margin. Now you have been asked by your company to audit, because anything which is a product class 20 is supposed to have a 25% markup. Anything that's a product class 25 is supposed to have a 30% markup. So the first thing we need to do is calculate the margin and put the margin in there. Instead of VAT, I'm going to say, and instead of turning around and saying amount times 14 divided by 100, I'm going to say the sales price minus the cost price divided by the cost price is going to give me my profit, and I can divide it by 100 to get down to a percentage. Okay. Now if I've got that, then I can turn around and say, well, if that percentage is 25% and the product code is that, we have a problem. So now I could go into my analysis and I could start looking for analysis based on. Okay. So I could, for example, say I want to summarize by product code, but only if that margin is not equal to what it should equal. Okay, so we started off simply by turning around and saying, let's bring in the data. we brought in the data, we added a field that didn't exist in the data. Now we made a mistake, we can go back and change it. And I can do the same with any of the other fields. Okay. Okay. That was doing it using the equation editor to import that text file. And that brings us, if I look at the, oops, that brings us to polling question number 1. So if I go to polling question number 1, and polling question number 1 has disappeared from my screen.
I'll launch it, Richard.
Thank you.
Okay, the question is, files are normally added via A, Desktop Plus, Project Overview, File Explorer, or Desktop Project. Please record your answers. Remember, you do not have to get the right answer, but you do have to record an answer if you are looking for CPE for today.
That's very interesting. The polling questions have disappeared totally from my screen, so
Yes.
I'm going to have to ask you to fire them off, Jim.
Oh, if you go up to the top and you just click on
View.
View,
Yep,
you should be able to enable the polling questions.
not working.
Hmm.
I can disable them, I can't enable them. Ah, yes I can. What I need to do is do that. Okay, got it.
Okay,
Thank
got
you.
it?
It was in the middle of my screen.
Right.
I'm looking for it in the side and it's in the middle. Thank you.
Okay, we've got about 90% that have voted, so we'll leave it open for another 10 seconds or so. If you are looking for CPE, you do have to answer the polling question. Okay, we will go ahead and we will close the polls now.
Do you want me to do it or do you want to do it?
No, I'll go ahead and do this one.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
I'll take it back over after.
Closed it. Share the results. Okay, and it looks like the majority said Desktop Plus.
Correct. The way that we add files is we go in through Desktop Plus. Now when we go in through Desktop Plus, it takes us to Import Assistant.
Okay, back to you, Richard.
Thank you. Okay, so we brought it all in. Now let's go back and we're going to import another one. So we'll do with our import again. And this time, again, I'm going to import a text file. But the file I'm going to import this time, again, it's going to come from my tutorial side. But this time, I'm going to pick up one which is an IPSIDIC file. And we'll see there that there is a file called IPSIDIC. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm going to pick it up not from tutorial, I'm going to pick it up from samples. And I have a file in here for you called IPSIDIC, ebcdic.dat. Okay, now this is a file that's been given to us downloaded from a mainframe. So it's not an ASCII file. If I bring that one in, and I say next, it looks like an ASCII file. There's my file. It looks exactly the same as the previous one. But if I turned around and said that that one was fixed length, that's what it's going to look like. If you take IPSIDIC data and try and interpret it as ASCII data, it looks like that. Okay, once again, you get what they gave you. Okay, so if they gave you IPSIDIC, IPSIDIC's what you've got. Now again, We've got the file. This time, this is our sales data file for our IMPSIDIC layout. So I'm going to say on this one, on my options, I'm happy with decimal separators, 1000 separators. You'll notice translate DOS character set isn't showing up because it's not DOS, it's coming from mainframe. Currency symbol is dollar. If I was using this in South Africa, I would change that to an R for rands. Okay. These are the short names you can use. Once again, if I was doing this for our French subsidiary, I would change the spelling of the short names. Doesn't affect this, it does affect it when you're trying to output. So, it says I think I've got a 73 character file, or record rather, and if I look at that, yep, there it goes, all the way along to position 73. So I'm happy it's got it right. Once again, if I change that length, you'll see it starts giving you diagonals. If I change it back to 73, it's vertical. If I go the other way, I'm getting diagonals. It's not a cast iron guarantee, but roughly, if they're looking vertical, it's probably got it pretty right. This is looking at a file which has a single record length. You can have files containing multiple length records, variable length records. So I'm going to say next, and again it's trying to put the lines in. Now the surname is in the correct place, it's in 20, so I'm happy with that. The initials, for some reason, they've given us a file which allows a surname 20 characters long and the initials 21 characters long. So you can have more initials than you can have surname. Strange, but that's the way the file is. You're stuck with what they gave you. The next field is our account number, and we know that that's a 9-digit number. There's my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That looks okay. My next one is my transaction date. I've got an extra line again. So I'll double click and remove it. 2002-0104. Fine. That's my transaction date. And there's my amount taking up the next 14 characters with 2 decimal places. So it's exactly the same procedure for defining the fields. I'll go to next. There's my first field. That's the surname. It is character. That's going to be the name. The next field is going to be initials. It's 21 characters. I have to leave it at that. Now, I don't have to leave it at that on the screen once I've defined it. But at the moment, I'm stuck. The next one is my account number. And you can see that it's defined it as a zoned field with implied decimals. It's not a zoned field, it's simply a numeric field. So I'll go up and put it as numeric and leave it at that. The next one it says is also a zoned field because it's coming, remember this is coming from IMPSIDIC. So again we know that this is not, it's my transaction date. I know that it's not a zoned field, it is a date field, and that it is 4 years, month, day. How do I know? Because that's the layout they gave me. Okay. Last one is my amount. Again, it's trying to interpret it and it thinks it's character. It's not, it's numeric. And we know that it does have 2 decimal places. So there's my numeric with 2 decimal places. Okay, so I can say next. I'm not going to add anything to this one. I'll simply say next. I'm not going to restrict the number of transactions I'm going to look at, so I'm going to say next. I don't want to generate field statistics, so I'm happy with that. And I'm going to call the file definition as whatever I want. Okay. So there's my Ipsidic IMD. I could have changed it to sales details. I'm not actually going to use it for anything. I have an error. Error, all the way down. Why do I have an error? Well, let me go and have a look. Let me look at the data. Modify the field. And the field I'm modifying was that one. Okay, the field name was that. I don't want it to be that. I want it to be transaction date. I wanted it to be transaction date with a parameter of 4 years, 2 months, 2 days. And it's still telling me it's wrong. Okay, there's my transaction date now, but I still need to modify the field. Why? Because I don't have that parameter. So I need to go in here and define it. It's a character field. It's been defined as character because I'm in the surname. If I go into my date, it's been defined as date. Field type is a date field. I don't have a choice. I've got character, numeric, date or time. And there's my parameter. And I know that it is supposed to be 4 years, 2 months, 2 days. But it's still telling me it's an error. Okay. And the reason it's an error is because it was coming in and it was not that kind of date. Now the other way I can do it is I can take that and I can remove it. I cannot remove it, so I would have to do File, Options, and clear out the Do Not Remove the Deletion of Virtual Fields. File, and then go down to my Options, and I can take out that Do Not Allow the deletion. Now I could take that field and remove it. Oops. Remove the field. Which field? I want to remove my transaction date. And it's gone. Okay. I can go and add it in. I can append a new field to it and do it that way. Okay. If you are going to delete, always remember to go back to your options and change that to not allowing the deletion of non-virtual fields again. Okay. So I can modify fields, I can find fields, I can add fields. Okay, now those two were probably the two most difficult to do, with the exception of bringing in print files. You'll be glad to know there's a lot easier ways to do files. Let me close those two down just now. And we're sitting in our project. I want to add a new file. Okay. I'm going to bring in a file from an AS400. Now the AS400 originally came in way back in the early days to replace the System 38, and it's now been replaced by the I series, but we still talk in terms of the AS400 file structures. So I'm going to bring in an AS400 file. It looks slightly different. It's looking for the input file name, And again, I need to go and find that file. And that file is sitting in the samples folder. There's my AS400 data.dat. Input file definition name. Again, I'm going to go and look for it in my samples folder. I don't seem to have one. So if I go back, and I go back again, I am not finding my input definition in there. Also in the samples folder. So I need to get into the samples folder. The perversity of inanimate objects. There's my samples. And down at the bottom, there's my AS400 definition. Okay. Like everything else, if you are looking for it and it's not where you expect it to be, it can be extremely confusing for the auditor. We were bringing that in from the samples folder. We brought in the raw data from the samples folder, and then I went into the tutorial one by mistake and I couldn't find it. Oh, where has it gone? Remember, you're not stuck inside IDEA. You can always go into your normal Windows, go into Start, and search for the file that you're looking for. I'm looking for anything which is an *.fdf because that's what it comes in as. And there's my AS400 FDF. Where is it? Oh, it's sitting in there. I can bring it in from there. I can always go into Windows to look for the thing. Now in this case, I know that it's still in my samples folder, so I can go down there, and there's my AS400 FDF. Now, the reason you've got that is because when you export from an iSeries, it exports the data, and from an audit perspective, it's wonderful. It exports the definition of the data. So I'm going to output it. I'm going to call it AS400 details. And there it is. Now I didn't need to define anything. It's already given me the company, the supplier number, whatever these are, the balance at the start, the balance today, and so on. And again, I can go through all 900 of those. I can go in, as we talked about on on Tuesday, and I can go and look at the field statistics. And it's given me the field statistics for all of those numerical fields. I could look at date or time, and it's saying that there's my balance, there's my transactions, absolute value, net value, number of records. If I want to see what are the positives, we don't have any negatives. We've only got one record with a minimum, which is 0. Hang on a second, we shouldn't have any zeros. Which is that one? That one there. Okay, that particular transaction has got 0, 0, 0. That shouldn't be right. I'm going to go and check that as an auditor. If I look at the data, we're sitting with a whole pile of information. Again, I can go back into my field statistics. Record number of the lowest is 1. Record number of the highest is number 33. This is not the number of records, it's the record number. So if I look at my data, and I go back all the way up to the top, There's the first one that came in like that, is record number 1. If I look at record number with the number maximum is record number 33 for that. And there it is there with BAL P. If I look at the BAL PP, there's the first one with that high number. Now there's 500 of them that are sitting high. Again, looking at the field statistics can give me an indicator of where there are anomalies. Which are the high ones, which are the low ones? Where would I as an auditor want to look? Well, if I'm looking for a certain range of values, anything that's higher than that range I need to follow up on. Anything that's lower than that range I need to follow up on. Okay, we brought in one from the AS400. Let's bring one in from a DBase file. And the DBase file I'm going to pick up again in that samples folder. There's a file, funnily enough, called DBase. It's importing it. It's saying, are there anything extra that I want to bring in? Any new fields that I want to define? No, I don't want any virtuals. What am I going to call it? I'm going to call it DBase. I'm happy with that. I'll import it directly. I could link. Now what link does is it creates a linkage between your definition and the live data. But remember, the live data is going to move on. So I'd rather input the data into my folder, into my particular project. In this case, I'll generate the field statistics. And there's my DBase file. With date deleted is nothing, account number, stat, branch, balance today, balance yesterday, etc. And again, once I've got the data in, you can do whatever you want. If I want to find anything where the balance today equals the balance yesterday, I can go and do that. I can look at appending a field and modifying a field. All I did with there was right-click. I could say display all records containing that value. And there's only one. Okay. So I can go into that criteria and I could change it. And you'll see there's a double equals. Double equals is the one that we use for exact match. Equals says if basically it's the two the same, then fine. Double equals said it's an exact match. Okay. So I can clear that and go back to where I was. If you didn't catch how I did that, I picked up that particular transaction, right-clicked, and said, show me all the fields containing it. Let's do it with a different one. There's a nice round number, 1000, record number 24. Let's look and say, display all records containing 1000 on that balance. Well, that wasn't really very helpful as an auditor, so let me clear that one. I have a question. What examples are sources of DBase files? Well, DBase is simply, it was very popular a few years back, it's simply a programming language type. A DBase file is an ODBC compliant database produced in the DBase format. Okay, it's a bit like Access. You get MS Access files, you get DBase files. So you could have, for example, a payroll that's been written in DBase. So that's the kind of file they're using. That's the kind of file you're importing. Okay. You won't find it very commonly these days. I did have to do an audit on one system. It was actually a veterinary, and the package that they were using had been written in DBase. So all of the files were in DBase. When I was importing customer files and outstanding debt files, they were all coming in as DBase files. Now the big advantage of DBase from an audit perspective, you didn't need to go and define where all of these fields are. It picks up the definition from the data dictionary of DBase and sucks it in. Okay, the AS400, it created two files, the data file and the definition file. For DBase, it all comes in on that one file, the DBF. What you're getting is the data, which is the raw data, and the metadata. Now metadata is the data about the data. So the metadata says this one is so many characters long and it's there, that so many characters here, and it's alpha and it's numeric and it's whatever. Okay. Happy. So that's what you're getting with that. Let's go and bring in another file. In this case, I'm going to bring in a Lotus file. Now you don't have a Lotus file on the ones that I gave you, so I'm going to pick one up. I'll pick a Lotus version 4 file. And I'm going to bring that in as a Lotus Work 4 file. In fact, I don't have one for a Lotus Work 4 file in this when I think about it. But I can go and look for one. Asterisk dot WK4, 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 WK4. Let me see if I can find any. No, I don't have any on my machine either. Okay, in that case, let's take a look at bringing in an Excel spreadsheet. Sorry, an Access. We'll pick it up from Access. Okay. Let me look on DBase. I may have one under here with a Lotus format. Samples. Do I have one? I don't think I do. No. Apologies. So I can't bring in a Lotus one for you. Close that down. We'll bring in an MS Access one. And the MS Access one, again, is going to come from my samples folder. And there's my Access MDB. Okay. It's a Microsoft database coming in from Access. If I say next, it will tell me, now hang on, this is Microsoft Access here. What tables do I want to bring in? Now in this case we've only got one table called database, but we could have had, if this was a system that had been written in Access, there could have been a customer database, a sales database, an accounts database, a raw material database, whatever it happens to be. I'm going to bring in my database. It's going to scan for field length. It's going to scan, I could scan all or scan only 10,000. Create a record number. Now if I say scan only 10,000, it's only going to look at the 10,000 for coming up with those definitions. I've got a question. We're going to do a file from Excel just now. Okay, don't worry, I would never leave Excel out. Okay, so we're going to bring this in as a database. Jump. And again, because it's a Microsoft database, it's automatic, an Access database, it's automatically picked up the definitions and plugged everything in. So there's a first name, surname, and all of these titles is picked up from the metadata. Whether it's numeric, which is here on the right-hand side, alpha, which is here on the left-hand side, or whether it's a date of birth. Again, if I look at that, you'll see it's date of birth, right? But it's only defined as a character field. Now I could go in here and say I want to change the column settings. It says it's a character field. I want to change that. Okay? Simply by wishing it into a date field isn't going to make it a date field. Okay? Remember, I'm looking at date of birth, not order date, payment date, or anything else. They gave me a character field, and the character field was date of birth. So I'm stuck with that. I can't do that, I can't do that. I can create an additional field. Okay, so again, if I go in my data, and we go into append, I can put in a field called date of birth. Okay, this is going to be virtual numeric. No, it's not. It's going to be a virtual date. Okay, and I'm going to get it by saying I want to go in and convert. So there's in here, you'll see all of these functions, at functions. Now, in there's date and time, and I can say date. Now, if I click on date, it's going to give me the system date, so I don't want that. What I want to do is convert to a date, and it will take a field containing dates with a character field type and convert it to a date. So I'll say convert to a date, and you can see over in the equation, it's in green, convert to a date, because it's going to be a virtual creation. And the field that I want to create is going to come from date of birth. So if I double click, it's going to give me that. And it tells me there's an incorrect number of parameters. Why? Because within that date of birth, I'm going to have to tell it that the date of birth, comma, is going to be quotes year, month, day. I have to give it the structure of it. Okay? And if I say OK now, and OK, you'll see there's nothing there, but over at this end, I have a virtual field, which is my date of birth. Now, I know that I can shift that and bring it along here. And there's my 1927-02-28 has now been converted to 2/28, month, day, 4 years. Okay, we'll talk a lot later in the course about using the at functions. In the meantime, I'm going to delete that column because we don't actually need it for our purposes at the moment. Remember, this is a virtual field. I can delete that. If it was deleting the date of birth itself, I'd have to go in and say, make it possible to delete that. Okay, let's bring in an Excel file. How do we bring it in? We bring it in from Excel. Where are we going to get it from? Well, let's have a look and see in our tutorial if we have any Excel files. Wonderful, we've got Excel files. Country emissions. We'll use this one later on in the course, but let's bring it in now. Okay, there it is, country, year, etc. If I double click on it and say next, it said, hang on a second. This is an Excel. Do I want to define the first row as being the field names? And that's very common when you get Excel files coming in. Do I want to import empty numeric cells as a 0? Do I want to call them 0? Yes or no? In this case, there aren't any, so I'll say leave it. No big deal, but I do want that first row to be the field names. And there they are. All of the countries, the years, etc. And I can run down through that. I can sort them into country ascending, country descending, whatever. Let me close that one down, and I'll delete the file. And I'll show you what would happen if we brought that in from our samples or from our, beg your pardon, bring it in from our samples or from tutorial, from wherever you want. I'll bring in that country mission file again. And this time I will forget to say field first rows. There's column 1, but the first row is now country, year and carbon. I don't want that. I should have said. So easiest thing, just pick it up. Here's my country emissions and delete it. Yes. Okay. If I import that, I'll bring it in from Excel. I'll bring it in as per the one that you've got on your sheet, which is bring it in from our samples file. And on there we have one called sample. I'll bring that in. Once again, now I've got multiple sheets. Okay, within this web file, within this Excel file, I've got multiple sheets. Which ones do I want? Well, I'll take the first 4. I'll take all of those. The first row is field names, so we'll make that OK, and I'll say OK. And all of a sudden, I've got my, over here, I've got sample detailed, sample inventory, sample sales, sample web log. Those are my Excel files. Now you see they've not brought them in. The last one's been brought in, sample web log. If I want to bring in that, I just click on it. If I want that one, I'll just click on it. If I want that one, I'll just click on it. Okay. Remember, deleting them from here is deleting them from the view. It's not deleting the files, and it's not deleting the definition of the files you've created. To get it back on the screen, I simply double click and it's back on the screen. Okay. Question is, if the title of the field is not in the first row, how do you create the file name? Okay. How you create it is fairly straightforward. You would create it by going in on the Excel one and creating it in Excel. Okay. When you bring it in from Excel, it automatically plugs it. So if you have only one, that's what you're getting plugged. Okay. Now one that I haven't looked at is bringing it in from ODBC. Okay. ODBC is a way of bringing things in which links. The question was, I've just had another question, have we only had the 2? Yes, we've only had the 2 questions at the moment, which probably means I'm out of sync with your slides. Let me just have a look. Polling question 1, text file, Ipsodic, AS400, oops, importing from DBase, polling question 2, importing from Access, importing from Excel. You're right, I apologize. I have omitted a polling question. That's what happens when you get carried away. If you go into the polling question, pick up polling question number 2. Polling question number 2 is looking at importing data from an I series. Importing data from an I series uses an MDB file, a workflow file, a DBF, or an FDF. All vote now. Remember what we brought in, and it's on about five slides back. Okay, we've got 70% voted. You don't have to get it right, but you do have to vote. I think everyone's voted. I will close the file. Yep. And share the results. And we've got a variety coming in. An MDB file. MDB file was coming in from a Microsoft database. When we imported from Access, we brought in MDB file. WK4 file, that was the one that was going to come in from Lotus. DBF file was the one that came in from database. The one that came in from AS400 was the AS400.dat, and the definition file that you had to bring in as well, the two were together, was the FDF, file definition file. Okay. Let me hide the results. ODBC. Now ODBC stands for Open Database Connectivity. Okay? Essentially, it's a relational database. Question was, when importing by ODBC, is it possible to join two tables together using SQL scripting, or must I import both data independently and then join the databases? Sometimes I only need one field from another table linking in a common field, and you have to import the entire table just to get that one extra field. Okay, let's take a look at it. Bring your file in from ODBC. If I'm bringing one in, I'm going to use Import Assistant. First thing I have to tell it is what kind of ODBC. Now that is simply what drivers have you got loaded onto your machine. Whether you're dealing with DBase files, Excel files, MS Access files, Visio database, Fox Pro, whatever they happen to be, it could be Informix SQL, it could be Oracle. These are all ODBC compliant databases, but you have to have the driver loaded onto your machine. Okay. If you don't have it, then you simply get it from your IT division and create a new ODBC data source. In this case, the only one I've got on here is a Visio one. Okay. And I've got a whole pile of Visio ones that can bring in, bolts, whatever it happens to be, airplane, filled seats. I can check the size of the ODBC import. I've chosen, it will consume that amount of disk space, there's that amount spare. If it's unacceptable, please cancel it. I can go into, and here's where I can start playing with SQL. Okay. If I look at this, you'll see I'm sitting in available tables. There are all kinds of different tables. And the question was, what if I want to use information from one table into another table? I can go into Advanced and I can select an SQL statement for importing. I can select the fields to download from this table. Okay, but that's only for one table. However, all this is doing, we're moving now into the way advanced area which we cover in the last couple. But let's say, for argument's sake, I'm going to bring in my filled seats, okay, and I'm going to create it. It may take several minutes. If it's a large task, there's my filled seats, okay. Now, something we haven't looked at yet, and we will look at towards the end, is within the history. You can see that I've got import data using ODBC. If I click on that plus, that's what I did, and that's how I did it. Okay, so there's my client, there's my DSA, and there's my samples. I can edit that script, so I can take a second one and I can link the two together. Okay, and select on that. And I can then use my equation editor to say, if that equals that, then import. Otherwise, don't. Okay. But we're now getting down to IDEA script, which we'll only cover in the 10th and 11th of these webinars. Okay. So I brought that in, and I brought in my airplane filled seats, and there they are there, and it sucked it straight in. Once again, it's picked up, because it's ODBC, it's picked up the data definition straight out of the data dictionary, the ODBC data dictionary, depending on which ODBC type that you're bringing in, whether it's an Oracle one, whether it's a Informix SQL, Ingress, whatever it happens to be. There are literally dozens and dozens of ODBC compliant databases out there now. Problems. There's a lot of databases that look similar to ODBC but are not. Things like the AS400. It's a relational database, but it's not a standard ODBC database. So you have to bring it in that way. Okay. What else can we bring in? Well, we can bring in things like print reports. Now, print reports we're not covering on this particular webinar. The reason I'm not covering it, we cover it on webinars 5 and 6, because that is very, I won't say complicated, is very fiddly, and it takes more than 2 hours to cover just that section. We can also bring in from SAP Smart Explorer, SAP AIS. I don't have any files on here as examples, so I can't really bring them in. We brought in text. We can bring in XML. Okay. If we're bringing in from XML, again, I'm going to go and look within my sample folder. And there's an orders detail XML. So I'll pick that one up. And again, I've got choices. I can look at the data route. I can look at the order details. I can import all of these, some of these, none of these. If I close that and close that, I could simply go in and say expand all. Does the same thing. Now these are the fields that are going to be brought in. This is where it's coming from. I can say collapse all. It's still going to bring them all in if I say OK. And there's all of my order details. Okay. No name, space, schema, location, order details from that. Now, I don't particularly want that on the screen, so I can say, let me take that and let me hide that. Do I want to display that or do I not? I can hide that one thing. The way I would hide it is from the heading. I can say, do I want to show all the fields? Do I want to hide the field? I'm going to hide this field. It's not on the screen anymore. If I print from that screen, I don't want all that garbage showing. Okay. If I want it back, I can simply go in there, right-click, and say Show All Fields, and it's back. Okay. That order ID, if I take that, I can go into the column settings, and there's my order ID. I can say I want it to be right aligned, left aligned, use a currency symbol, don't use a currency, use overlaps, change the text color. It's not going to change the data, but it's going to change what it looks like on the screen. And that way I can print it from the screen. We'll talk about it on the next webinar when we talk about actually producing printouts and conducting analysis. Webinar 4 looks at actually how do you structure this other than what you see on the screen. You can work with that and say what you see is what you get and simply print it. But it's not particularly elegant. It might do for your working papers, but on the other hand, to shove something like that, let's take those airplane seats, to simply put that as it is into a report would be unacceptable. So we need to get something that's better than that. And we'll look at that later on. Okay. Last one I want to do, I want to import a text file, and I'm going to pick up a comma delimited file. And within the samples folder, you may or may not have this one within it. But I've got one in here which I put in called Interviewing CVS. Okay, Comma Separated Value System. Okay, now that's what it looks like at raw data. Okay, and it's just garbage. Now the problem is I cannot say that this is fixed length because there's a fixed length. It's all one big record, or in this case all 3 big records. But we know it's not. There's a whole pile of stuff in there. Okay, attended, first name, last name, email, registration, date, country, address, phone number, city, organization, unsubscribed, IA member or not. This is a file that I took from people who attended a webinar of mine. Okay, I couldn't give it to you because it's a confidential file, unfortunately. This is not a test one, this is a genuine live one. So I'm afraid you'll just have to follow along. Okay, so I'm going to say it's delimited. I'm going to say next. It says, okay, what is it delimited with? Well, I've got it comma delimited because that's how I created it. If I say colon, you'll see there are no colons in there. So I'll go back to comma. Could be semicolon, could be tab. It's whatever you were given with the fields delimited. In this case, it was a comma delimited file. Okay, and it knows it goes all the way along there until it gets to the end. I can say next. The first visible row is the field names. Yes or no? Yes, it is. Okay. Next. And now again I can go in and say attended. I can create those field names. Or I can take that out and say next. And there they are there. Okay. So I want the first visible row as the field names, and now I will put in the field names. I've not bothered to do it in this one, but there they are, attended, first names, last name, etc., etc. Okay. I'm going to close that down because, as I say, that one are the names of genuine people who have attended my own webinars in the past. Okay, and that brings us to polling question number 3. And polling question number 3 says, ODBC files require. Connectivity to SAP, DBase loaded, the appropriate drivers, or Microsoft Access. You pays your money, you takes your choice. Okay. Got a few more people to go. We're up to 80%, 90%. Okay, and we will close the poll. Remember, if you cannot vote because you're working from a tablet, you can put them all into one big email and send it through. I will close it and share the results. In the polling results, we have unanimity that in order to look at an ODBC file, you have to know what kind of ODBC file you're looking at, and you have to have the right drivers loaded. Okay, so let's take a look. We've now brought our file in. Now we've got a choice. What do we want to do with it? Well, guaranteed the order that they gave it to you in is the wrong order. And I've had the experience when I was dealing with the bank where IT was terribly helpful. And they kept saying, how do you want the data? And I kept saying, give it to me as it is. Yes, but we can put it into this order, we can do that, we can do that. Just give it to me as, but you'll just come back and ask us to change it. No, we'll work on it as, because if you give it to me as it is, I can put it into whatever format I want. Now, contrast that to another organization. I was dealing with one of the senior directors in the company, and he was telling me that he was not overly impressed with IT auditors because he used to be the head of IT for a company. And when it happened to be their external auditors, but external or internal, they came in and they wanted to run a whole pile of cats to extract information and analyze it. And they picked up last year's files instead of the current files, and they gave these to the auditors. And the auditors spent a week and many tens of thousands of dollars auditing the previous year's files, and they didn't pick up that they had been given the wrong files. Okay. Now, to identify that is very simple. You run some hash totals, do some totals and compare it to what's supposed to be the live files, and if they disagree, you've probably got the wrong file. That's the most common way of finding it. These guys didn't, and he was very proud of this, that he'd managed to fool the auditors for a week. I said, how much did that audit cost? And he told me. I said, so you knowingly wasted all of that money from your company in order to prove a point. And he went bright red. And I didn't do any work for that company again after that. But it's a problem. Give us the data as is. We will figure out. I don't want you changing it. I don't want you editing it. I don't want you sorting it. Just give me the raw data and we'll figure out what to do. Now, one of the first things we have to do is get it into the right order. And we've got some choices. We can either sort or we can index. Okay. If I want to sort within IDEA, I can take the data and I can sort it. Sorting it will create a brand new database that's physically sorted into that order. Okay, so this is no longer the live database. This is a copy of the live database chain, or I'll rephrase that. This is no longer a copy of the database as it is. This is a copy of the database which we have now created in a different order. Okay, and I can describe what sorted order I want, the inherent order, etc. Why? Because if I want to look at hitting a big file. To sort the whole file takes a long time. Okay. Now, it always takes a long time, but it could be the difference between half a second and 3/4 of a second with a small file. Or it could be the difference between 10 minutes and 20 minutes. Or it could be the difference between 10 seconds and 20 minutes. Depends on the size of the file. So sorting generally is slower because you're having to hit every single record and write out perhaps big records. Indexing says read all of the file, yes, but when you're sorting it, instead of moving through multiple sort work files on the whole thing, I can perhaps take just the field that we're interested in. Let's say we want it sorted by customer name. I'll take just the customer name, create a little file with just the customer name and a pointer pointing back to the live data or to the full database, and then I sort that index. Okay. Now, if the records are 1,000 characters long, and I can create a list with 20 characters, or 10 characters, or 3 characters, and a pointer to where it needs to go, it's a lot faster to do an index than it is to do a sort. So why don't we just do indexes all the time? Well, if we sort, we get a bigger file compared to a small index. A sort uses more disk space. Index uses less. A sort will create another file the same size as the one that we're sorting, but it also creates a whole pile of temporary files, and those can be enormous as it's sorting. That sounds like we never should sort. Well, there's a reason. If we're going to hit the whole file, every single transaction on that file, and this is mega files, you're talking 3 or 4 million transactions, 3 or 4 hundreds of millions of transactions, and I'm going to hit every single one of those, then that's 300,000 or 400,000 reads. If it's an index, that's 3 or 4 million reads of the index and then a read of the file. Read of the index, read the file. Read the index, read the file. So that's going to take a lot longer to process. If I'm going to process a few records and I have to sort the whole file to do it, then processing a few records is much slower. Where with the index, once I've created the index, I can take one and jump straight into that spot on the file, one and jump right into that spot on the file. If I've sorted the file, to get to the one I'm interested in, I'm going to have to go read, all the way through the file until I get to the one I'm interested in. Okay. And if I need to do another read, I can't necessarily say read the next one. I'm going to have to go back to the start and go read until I find the one I'm interested in. So it depends on what you want to do with it and the speed that you can process at. Why would I sort rather than index? Okay, we've now got our data. Now we can analyze the data. Terrific. Problem. What are you going to do with the data? You've got it. Well, we need to go back and say, why are we doing this audit in the first place? What is the objective of this project? Who is the custodian of the data? Who is the owner of the data? Which is not necessarily the same thing. The custodian of the data may well be IT. They look after your data for you, but they're looking after it for you. The question is, who are you? Finance, purchasing, HR, payroll, banking division, whatever it happens to be. Because I'm going to have to get permission to get into that data. I need to then find out who is the IT person who's overseeing that system, whether it's a DBA or whether it's the head of operations or whether it's the head of IT themselves. And now I need to consider the data issues. Which data do I need? I have seen an auditor who went to IT and said, I would like to look at the banking system, please. I'm an auditor, I can go and look at anything I want. And they said, okay, which data do you want? He said, well, all of it. They said, how big is your disk? Because you're talking 300 terabytes of information. So which bits of data do you want? Which bits are essential? Which bits are nice to have? When should I request the data? Do I ask for it during the online day? Or perhaps if I don't need it as it is right this very second, maybe I can say, look, give me the data at midnight when all transactions generally have gone quiet on the database and it's easier to extract. Bear in mind, if you are taking that raw data down onto your system, from now on, any breach of security, they're going to point a finger straight at you and say, it was fine till the auditors got to it. The leak must have come from the auditors. So you need to make sure that when you're dealing with confidential or sensitive information, the security as it's being transferred to you is your responsibility, and the security once it's on your system is your responsibility. Now, we've all heard of situations where data that's sitting on laptop computers, the laptop is stolen and all that confidential data is gone. These days a lot of auditors are using tablets and they're retaining the information in the cloud. How do you secure that information while it's in the cloud? Because if it gets leaked, it's your problem. It's the company's problem, but it's your problem. So the first thing we need to do to analyze our data in IDEA is to detect, audit, looking for fraud, looking for whatever, is to get access to the data. So we have to identify what is our investigation objective, arrange how you're going to get the data, meet with the data custodian, the owner of the data, and with IT. Define which bits of data you need, which data fields you need, which data files you need, how you're going to get them out. If they are in multiple files, how you're going to tie them together. We can do that in IDEA, and it's a piece of cake. We can say link that file to that file using that, link that file to that file using that, and then just give me the bits I need. I need to know the format of the file. Is it an access file? Is it an ODBC compliant file? If so, which one? What is the record layout of the file if I'm going to have to define it myself? When are we going to transfer it? How are we going to transfer it? And then verify the data that you have received. This is your quality assurance. Make sure that the data that you have received is the data that you wanted to receive. It's current, it's up to date, or it's last year's if that's what you wanted to look at. Verify it before you start doing your processing, and particularly before you start drawing conclusions. So what can we do? We've got our data in. We can identify virtually any kind of data-related anomaly. So which bits do we want to do? Depends what you're trying to find out. If this was an inventory file, you're doing an audit within the inventory area, kind of things you might want to do is calculate totals of inventory balances, calculate totals by product category, and compare it to what's coming out of the live system. Generate exception reports. Look for negative values, negative quantities. Can you get negative stock on hand? If the system allows it to happen, you will get it. If you do a stock check, how many of the records say -5 in stock? Now it's not really -5, but what the system perhaps has allowed them to do is draw down the stock from the stock that's physically there before they have recorded the receipts. So you had 10 in stock, 20 came in, someone ordered 15, so they took 15 out. Before they added the 20 to the records, you've now got -5. When you add the 20, it will balance itself out and you have 15 in stock. But right now at the second, the stock is showing -5. We can use this to select items out of our perpetual stock records for doing test counts. We can use it to look at inventory transactions after a period end. We can do an age schedule of how long these items have sat in inventory if we've got a date of receipt in there. We can take the usage and compare it to the inventory on hand and figure out how much stock we have on hand. And we can look at what is coming out of the live computer and what's coming out of ours and say where are the discrepancies. Okay, so we can analyze virtually anything that we want. And that brings us to polling question number 4. Polling question number 4 is looking at back to our sorting and indexing. Advantages of sorting versus indexing include, okay, this is why sorting can be better than indexing. Not always, but why? Sorted files are quicker when accessing the whole file. Sorted files are quicker when accessing selected items. Sorting is faster than indexing. Sorting uses less disk space. Please vote now. Okay, we'll give it another 10 seconds. All right, I lied. We'll give it another 15 seconds. Everyone's suddenly woken up and voting. Quick, we've only got 5 seconds left. Okay, and we will close the poll and share the results. The majority of people said sorted files are quicker when accessing the whole file. And that's true. Sorted files are quicker when accessing selected items. Remember what I said? If you only want to look at 5 items in a sorted file, then you're going to have to read the whole file to get to those 5 items. With an indexed file, you're going to have to read the index. But the index we said was a very small file. We can read it very quickly and then jump to the 5 items we need out of the 2 million records. Okay, so correct answer, A. Okay, let's press on. You've got the data. Question, how much garbage is in there? Is it the data that you wanted to look at? We can use control totals, we can use hash totals. Hash total is simply a total of a field that doesn't make any sense to total. So I can add up customer numbers. Now the total doesn't mean anything, but if I compare the total, if I add them up on the originating system, and then I add them up on the file I've received, and those two match, it tells me that I've got all of it and I've got them correct. If they don't match, either I'm missing some of the records or there's been some corruption in the transfer because they don't match. So that's a hash total. Obviously, if I take a total of values and I compare the actual to what I've got, I'll pick up immediately if the totals are wrong, that something's missing, or I'm not looking at the whole thing, or they've edited out Department 99 or whatever. I can use data verification to make sure that when I'm looking at dates, I have got day, day, month, month, year, 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 or the other way around. If necessary, I can clean up data for interrogation. You may find that in the data that you've been given, there is some corruption on the file, on the live file. So we may want to exclude those before we start interpreting the results of our inquiries and saying, oh, this is all wrong. No, it's not. We've got 1 or 2 records there that we need to extract, put them aside. We will go and physically look at those transactions and find out what the hell they are. But in the meantime, I want to look at the rest of it. If you are cleaning it up, you record everything you clean up. And you can use IT to help you keep it clean. Okay? You record it because if you have changed anything, someone's going to say, why did you change it? What did you change? How did you know that was the right change? If it comes to a case in court, whether you are prosecuting or defending, you will be asked to verify that the data that you have analyzed is as it was when you got it. And if it's not, why is it not, and what changes did you make to it? So you record all cleanups. As far as getting the actual data is concerned, we need to get access rights. Now, 90% of the time, all you want is read only. Okay? And very commonly the auditor will find resistance from IT. Why should you have access to that data? We are not going to give you access to it. At the end of the day, IT are the custodians of the data on behalf of user management. IT does not have the authority to let you in. User management does. It's their data. They can permit whoever they want. Now, if they say no and IT says no, you are the auditor. Your audit charter typically says, go anywhere, look at anything. You have the right to look at anything, but you keep that one in reserve. Remember, your access rights to these data files are temporary. You only need access to live data for the duration of the audit, long enough to copy down what you need. You do not have a carte blanche to say, anytime I feel like it, I can look at everybody's pay. You can do that when you're auditing the payroll. If you're not auditing the payroll, you don't have access to it. You need to ensure the confidentiality of the data that you have got is maintained while it's in your possession, which means your machine has to be kept secure, and if you're archiving the copies, you have to keep those things encrypted. So that if this machine by accident falls into somebody else's hands, they've got the machine, they've got the data, but the data is meaningless to them. They cannot do anything with it. Getting the data from the machine, raw data could be from a mainframe, it would be possibly IPSODIC, from a PC, possibly ASCII. They're going to come in from all of those different sources that we've talked about, and there's one that we haven't mentioned. They could come in from tape. Okay. They could give you a magnetic tape. Here is our backup tape. Work on that. Which means you're going to need a tape reader. And it's quite possible to borrow a tape reader from IT to extract the information from the tape. Okay. Once again, making sure that you're getting all of the data and that you're getting a clean version of the data as at a point in time, which is the point in time you wanted. As far as needing to obtain the data, we need access to the data, so we need to know where it is. What file is it on? What disk is it on? Can I have read access to it? And I need to know what that data looks like, either because the system will tell me or because I've been given a record layout. You will get arguments against it. You have no right to the data files. You are the auditors. You don't know what you're doing and you don't know what you're looking at, so what's the point in giving it to you? You're probably going to damage the data. You actually don't know what you want. You cannot tell me exactly what you want. Well, what I want to look at is dependent on what I find. Your counter-argument? If necessary. As audit, we have unrestricted access to any data that we deem necessary for this audit. You don't know where it is and you don't know what you want to look at. We know what we want to know. You, IT, should be able to tell me where that data is. You'll probably damage the data. We will damage nothing because we want read-only access. We do not want the ability to access it in update mode or delete mode or any other mode. We want read-only access. We cannot damage the live data. You won't understand what you're looking at? Yes, we will, because you're going to give us the data file layers. And then we'll know exactly what we're looking at. Further arguments and counter-arguments? Tell us what you want. We'll extract it for you. We don't want it extracted. We want it in raw format. Why don't we just give you a printout? Tell us what you want. Well, if you give us a printout because that's all you've got, then we will simply take it into the computer and analyze it that way. Because we may need to analyze it top down, bottom up, side to side, diagonally, depending on what we find. Oh, there's no point in giving, I've heard all of these, believe me. There's far too much data to analyze. Have you ever heard of a computer? We don't know how to access that data. Very common when they're dealing with the cloud. Okay? Or they're dealing with a package. We don't have the layouts of the package. Tell us who does, we'll go and speak to them. There's no way to access that data. Okay? What do you mean there's no way to access the data? If you're running the computer, you're accessing the data. What you're saying is you don't know how to access the data. And for that one, tell us, go back to the previous one, tell us who does, we'll ask them. We don't have files going back that far. Okay? 2 questions. How far back can you go? Second question, who decided the retention and on what base was that decided? Because that could really, really screw up not the audit. But let me give you an example. In South Africa, the Companies Act says that the head of finance is responsible for ensuring the retention of financial records for a period of time. Okay? Now, that's not simply saying we've got a tape with financial records on it. That's saying you've got to be able to read that tape or read the disk or read the file and actually see what it looks like. That caused a lot of problems when Y2K came along because companies converted for Y2K, but they didn't convert last year's backup and the year before's backup and the year before's backup, which meant that they had to retain the programs that could read that file as it was 5 years ago. And most of them didn't. They converted and went ahead and they retained 13 generations of current programs. They didn't retain the programs that went back 5 years. And they had no way of converting 5 years ago's data to current because having gone through Y2K, they threw the stuff away. Now the problem with that was the Companies Act says it's the responsibility of the head of finance, and the penalty for not doing it is go to jail, go directly to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200. Now if you turn around and say that the retention period for data is not in line with the law, you are breaking the law because you're not retaining the records appropriately. And it's not IT, it's the head of finance, HR, whoever it happens to be, who will be held accountable. Boy, does that focus the retention. And that brings us to our next polling question. Polling question number 5. Polling question number 5 says, auditors have the right of access to any data at any time, only when investigating fraud, only with full update rights, or only for the duration of the audit. And I'll leave you to think about that. Almost complete. Ten more seconds. It always reminds me of a cartoon I used to have. Showed a guy leaning against a wall, coming home after work exhausted and saying to his wife, "What a day. The computer broke down and we all had to think." And unfortunately, this is a bit where you have to think. Okay, closing the poll and sharing the results. The reason I said this is a slightly trickier one is because it says auditors have the right to access any data at any time and only for the duration of the audit. So A and D combined is actually the right answer. Given a choice, D would probably be the right answer, but strictly speaking, you could require to access the data at any time, but not at every time. Okay, so you've got the data. Now what? Well, now we need to check. Is it what we wanted? Is it the right time period? Is it the live data? Is it all there? It gets very embarrassing when you've been given the wrong layout and you say, there are problems, and they say, actually, no, you missed out that bit and you forgot this bit. That's bad enough. That gives you a red face. But if you came to a non-adverse conclusion and said everything here is okay, and what's been concealed is actually a fraud, you've just missed it. And the finger that will be pointed at you is lack of professional competence and lack of due care. Okay? So check. Make sure that you know what you're looking at. Check it against control totals, check dates, check transactions. Never believe what the first printout tells you, particularly if it's what you want to hear. Okay, you've got the data. It looks like you've got the right data. That's it. Now it's easy. Now we can just analyze it. Know what you wanted to find. You knew where the data resided. Now you've got it. Now you can go ahead with the analysis you plan. This is not the point at which you start planning. Okay? The planning should have been done long before you decided what data you wanted. You've got it, you've got the plan. Now you can go and analyze it. Now you've got the answer. Now check it. Remember, never believe what that first printout tells you. Never believe what the first analysis tells you, particularly if it's what you want to hear. I have a question. So, bear in mind, if all you can get is the hard copy, remember, if they can give you a printout, they can print it to a file instead. Comma delimited if possible. Fred Smith, comma, internal audit, comma, the date, comma. Easy for the software to identify. If all you've got is a printout, a hard copy printout, you can scan it. You're going to get one field of 120 characters per record. But the audit software will allow you to define the fields within the 12 characters, within 120 characters, and you can define different layouts for different rows, and that's what we'll cover in 5 and 6. And that brings us to polling question number 6, the final polling question. If all you can get is a hard copy, which of the following is not true? You cannot use IDEA. You can scan it in the document. You can request a printout in file format. You cannot read a PDF directly. Which one is not true? Final votes coming in. Once again, you don't have to get it right, but you do have to vote. All set in. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. And you can see that the majority of people have gone for the following is not true. You cannot use that IDEA. Yes, you can use IDEA. That is not true. You've just got to get into a format the IDEA can use it in. You can read a PDF directly in, and that's what we're covering in webinars 5 and 6. Okay. So, let us resume. And the resume part is the bit that says, any questions? Don't be shy.
Well, Richard, I don't see any additional questions coming in, so let me just say thank you for putting on a great presentation today. And here's our training schedule on the screen now for what's coming up next. Next Tuesday we have conducting basic data analysis with IDEA, followed by reporting using IDEA. If you haven't signed up for these sessions, you can sign up now. The registration is open for those. So please go to the AuditNet site and you should be able to register, and if you haven't already paid, we can send out an invoice or make payment arrangements, either way. But I want to thank you all for joining us today. Thanks for your questions, and I'll say goodbye for the day. Bye.
Bye, and thank you so much. Thank you for the compliment that just came in. I appreciate it.